Hello, welcome to Mets Off Day Live presented by Planet Fitness. Join Planet Fitness for $1 down, $24.99 a month. Deal ends June 14th. I'm your host, Niki Lattarulo. We have Mets SNY reporter Steve Gelbs with us and co-host of the Mets pod, Connor Rogers, with us. Guys, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks, Niki. Happy to be here. Can't get enough of doing more content with Gelbs, of course.
I was going to say, I mean, Niki, we're obviously very happy to see you as well. But I got the email. I said, hey, Connor Rogers is doing it. I'm in.
I saw both of you. I was like, what an elite trio we have going. So with that, we'll start by going around the diamond. The Mets went 1-1 against the Phillies in London, losing their first game 7-2, made a comeback in game 2 with an impressive 3-run ninth inning against Mets rival Jose Alvarado, winning the game 6-5. Steve, we'll start with you. What was your biggest takeaway from the Mets series in London?
Yeah, for me, it was less to do with what actually happened on the field between the two teams and more to do with just the spectacle and the weekend. I'm generally one of these people that's pretty skeptical of these international games that are happening all across professional sports right now. And I don't really think that I expected it to be pulled off quite the way that it was. I'll be honest, I haven't paid such close attention to the other London series that have taken place. And I thought for the most part, without being there, it seemed like it was a great event, a really great atmosphere, a lot of fans traveling, not just from the United States, but from all over Europe. And it seemed like there were a lot of legitimate baseball fans in London, which was pretty cool to watch. And then I think the players, if you listen to their interviews, seem to really be soaking it in. And I know talking to a lot of guys beforehand, there were very few who had been to London previously, and they were really excited about the prospect of going over there and taking in the culture and getting to enjoy a weekend away out there. So I think especially with a baseball season that can become really monotonous, this was a really cool event to kind of break it up. So for me, that was the main takeaway, not so much what happened on the field in the two games.
Yeah, I agree, Steve. I think at times, because of the NFL's strategy to this, it can feel overdone, but this felt just right. And we've noticed, with the Mets pod, we have a chunk of the listener base that is, UK based. And I think the passion is really showing from those fans. So they deserve to have baseball out there, even if it's just for a series, especially part of the Mets fan base having a stronghold there. And it did feel special. It felt unique. It felt like it was the right timing. The two games. Obviously, for the American fans watching, it's kind of cool to wake up and watch a morning game on Sunday as well. And it was great to see how the teams embraced it, how we had fans travel, but then had local fans as well. So I thought overall it was just really, really well done. And it felt like the stadium atmosphere was a little extra special.
I happen, Niki, not to interrupt, but I happen to love, too, the number one Jeff McNeil Belgian fan club, which was the most specific fan club I think I've ever seen.
Listen, we gotta hype Jeff McNeil up right now. So honestly, perfect to have him having a fan club out there. Connor, did any players in particular stand out to you in either of those games?
Yeah, to me, it's the competition the Mets are starting to embrace, and it's no surprise that Luis Torrens, who ended the series with an exclamation point, but even Jose Iglesias as well. To me, just having these guys with the big league club right now, it feels like there's a different energy with the Mets. And I'm not saying they're going to be stars. I'm not saying they're going to be the reason they turn and make a playoff run or anything like that. But you see how it kind of changes things. And I don't want to say the Mets were lackadaisical, but McNeil finally plays on Sunday. He goes 2 for 4. Torrens has made an impact from a spot since Francisco Alvarez got hurt. The Mets have gotten negative impacts from the catching spot. So I think to me, the energy of those guys, the energy of the team, and I'll even piggyback it and say Mark Vientos kind of taking over third base when you want to talk about competition, taking Brett Beatty's spot. It just feels like it's given the Mets a little bit of a shot in the arm. And I thought it really showed through, not just in this series, but notably in the national series as well, where the Mets are now 4-1 in their last 5 and trying to build some momentum.
Yeah, the Mets were also, they needed that burst of energy. So getting that game 2 win, I think, was huge. Steve, how important do you think it was that they leave London with a win?
Yeah, for me, it's less about winning one particular game, especially in a 2-game series in a 162-game season. But I think there were a couple of reasons why getting that one ended up being critically important. For one, piggybacking off what Connor said, at this point in the season, they really got to make a push if they don't want to be sellers at the deadline. And so it continues the momentum a little bit from that Washington series, which was one of the best series that they've played all season long. But beyond that, I think one of the things that has been really difficult for this team to overcome is the way that they've been losing, especially in the month of May. There were so many gut punches, so many devastating losses. And I thought by the end of May, you were starting to see it really start to take its toll. This would have been another one of those losses in game number 2. Game number 1 is what it is. I mean, the Phillies are a great team. In my opinion, they're the best team in the National League. And so you lose by, what was it, 7-2 in that first game. It is what it is. But to come back, to take the lead the way that they did, and then to blow it again in the bottom of the 9th, that to me would have been one of those deflating, any momentum is lost losses. And instead, they keep that momentum going, and they finish the game with, as Connor pointed out, a spectacular double play by Terren. So that to me is why it was important to take that one in particular, not to just split the series, but to make sure that you didn't lose in that type of a way again on Sunday.
Yeah, those type of losses definitely can be deflating. So now they know they could do it. Hopefully they keep that ball rolling. Let's switch gears to about last off day. The Mets had 2 off days as they traveled to London. Let's check out what they did. All the time with their family, doing so much fun stuff here. This is for both of you. I guess I'll start with Connor. Have you ever been to London? If so, favorite thing to do there? If not, what do you want to do if you get to go there?
Yeah, I went for NFL Rams-Bengals in, I want to say, 2019, and it was an incredible trip. Obviously, it's such an old city that you could just walk around an entire day and take in so many different things. Obviously, the pubs are a really good time if you have an extra non-work day to kill, and I unfortunately had about 3 of those on a 4 to 5 day trip. So it's a phenomenal city. Like I said, very, very walkable. If you're from New York, it won't feel overwhelming to you at all. And there's a lot of different cultural places to eat, multicultural places to eat. So it's a great time. And it seems like the Mets really embrace that as well.
Steve, have you ever been there?
I've never been to London. I desperately want to go. When I do eventually get over there, I'd like to do 2 things. The first thing would be to do Jets pre and post game live this year with Connor, Bart, and Willie, just so I can get into a pub really with Bart and Willie. You too, Connor, but a British pub with
I
Bart
understand.
and Willie.
Yeah.
I feel like that would be an experience. And then the second thing that I would like to do if I ever get over there just on a trip with my family, I really want to go to the Churchill war rooms. That would be for me. I'm a big World War II buff. That would be for me the bucket list thing that I'd want to do over in London.
Steve, how about this? So we've seen the Mets now play in London. Say you got to plan the international series for the MLB and the Mets were involved. What is a city you would like to see them play in across the globe?
I'd love to see them go to Italy. Again, this is just selfish. Like, I want to go to Italy again. That I have been to Italy, and it's one of those trips that I feel like I left saying, if I just went here on every trip for the rest of my life, I'd be good. But I think, especially with the Mets, you get Piazza over there, you get Brandon Nimmo over there. I think Italy would be a really, really fun one. What about you?
I think for me, how about we see Kodai Senga start a game in Japan? I mean, the fans out there are just, it's a totally different energy level when you watch baseball on that side of the world. It feels like there's constant chanting, constant energy. It feels like nobody's ever sitting down. It's a different atmosphere. And I think that kind of homecoming would be really, really cool. So for me, and listen, I've never been that far across the globe. So if we could find a way to squeeze our way into a SNY trip for that one, it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a great one. I wish I could switch it now. You always do this. You always come up with something to make me think, Connor. But Japan, everybody that has played over there, if you talk to them, that's the thing that they're raving about is not just the culture, but the way that fan base embraces the sport. And I think there are some little nuances that would make it really cool to be a witness to personally. Like, one thing that I heard is over in Japan, because the culture is so, it's so polite and nobody wants to do anything to ruffle any feathers. If you catch a home run ball or a foul ball, I believe you give it to an usher and they bring it back and give it back to the players on the field. I think that's what I've heard. So I'd love to see stuff like that. I think it's, for a country that is so baseball crazy, to see how they do it a little bit differently, that would be really interesting to me.
Yeah, I would guess they don't have 50-year-old men trying to take foul balls and home run balls away from children. A little bit more respect there across the globe. All right, of course, even with the positive vibes, Steve, it felt like the Mets couldn't escape the London trip without some controversy. How about Steve Cohen's interesting comments about the food in London? Take a listen to this.
I think the food here is fantastic. Okay, I think it's better than New York. I'll tell you, I was on the 10th hole or 11th hole at Sunningdale, and they had these sausages at the Midway House. That was awesome. Okay, little Coleman's mustard, little white bread on, wrap it around, delicious.
Hey guys,
Hey,
I'm back.
hey,
Right on time.
Nothing like a little technology issue, but we're back and we're going to talk. You just heard from Steve Cohen. Connor, what was your reaction to his preference for London food over New York food?
Not a great take. A big fan of Steve Cohen and the dollars he has pumped into my childhood favorite baseball team. But listen, I mean, we could say, a Northeast guy. I'm from New York. I have a lot of pride in the food from New York, and I think I can speak on this. I've been to London. Food was fine. Does not hold a candle to the food in New York City when you're comparing the best of the best. But I'll give Steve Cohen this. I think, it's the international series. His team is 50% represented in it, alongside the Phillies. I think there was a little bit of, I don't want to say pandering, but trying to get in good with the city that the Mets were visiting. So no problem with a good PR move from the Mets owner.
Steve, if a London person, a Londoner, was visiting New York, would you say they had to get the New York pizza or the New York bagel?
So I think it's very close, but I would go with the New York pizza. And this is why. In this job now for a little over a decade, I've traveled the country quite a bit. I have had really good bagels around the country. I have not had, in many places, really good New York style pizza. Like, you go to Detroit, you get Detroit style pizza. You go to Chicago, it's a different type of pizza. Like, that's all good. But if you want a good New York slice, it's not easy to find. So I would say you get your New York slice, because bagels, you have a better opportunity in other places to get a pretty good bagel. I'll also add one more thing about the Steve Cohen maybe pandering a little bit to everybody in London. I also think he was being just a great owner and taking some of the heat off of one of his young players, Brett Beatty, who also said, I love London, but it's just like a cleaner New York. And I thought, all right, you know what? As an owner, I'm going to take the heat away from Beatty, who's got enough going on with everything going on right now on the field. And that's what we do. That's how we did it. By the way, I think we lost Niki again. What do you think?
Yeah, I think she was just disgusted by the Steve Cohen take of, listen, Niki, New Jersey roots. I think there was a little bit of, insult there. And really, Steve, the food talk didn't stop there. Speaking of the English food, London Stadium, I don't know if you saw this, featured a 2-foot hot dog that comes in at 3,000 calories. It's called the Broomstick. The $40 glizzy is topped with braised beef chili, jalapenos, and sour cream. Steve, you have a bit of a reputation for trying unusual foods at opposing team stadiums. Where would this rank among the most outrageous ballpark foods you've seen yet?
Well, first of all, I did not know about this. Is where I feel really old. I didn't know that hot dogs were called glizzy until Dollar Dog Nights at Citi Field, and everybody was chanting "Glizzy Gelbs" as I was dressed in the hot dog suit, and I thought it was a bit of a bit of them coming at me. I was like, what does that mean? So I didn't know. I'm still trying to figure out the origins of glizzy. That's the first thing. Second thing, I'm not trying to denigrate what's going on here in London, but I think that's like a middle of the pack outrageous food. Especially with the way things have been going in stadiums over the last decade, every single stadium has something trying to one up the next. And I've eaten really big hot dogs before. In Texas, they had something similar that I think I had in like 2017. So I don't know. This is something new for London. So they're trying. They tried their best, but I don't know. It's it's no vending machine burrito, you know?
Yeah, you've survived worse. I'll say that. And I think on top of it as well, I mean, so it's a 2 foot hot dog. Yes, there are toppings, but the standard hot dog is 6 inches. So if you can eat 4 hot dogs in a day, I think you can handle the broomstick with the extras on top
Could
of it.
you?
Not that
So could you
I
do it?
could
Could you
do it. Do I have work the next day? Like, do I need to be productive in the next 20, we'll call it 15 hours? I probably would
Yeah.
feel awful about myself for quite some time. But if it was a challenge and I was asked to do it, I think it could be done. Stay tuned for Jets pregame, where I eat a broomstick on the desk.
We'll have to make sure we can go to break quickly if anything goes wrong with the broomstick on Jets postgame. Well, sticking to the New York series in London, there was a lot of fans in attendance, but it looked like there was more Phillies fans than New York fans, and New York fans are known to travel well. Steve, as someone that is at all these Mets games, have you noticed a dip in attendance in Mets fans amidst these struggles?
Not really, to be honest with you. The Mets fan base travels really well, and I'm not breaking any news here that this is not the first season that they've experienced some down times. And so, I've been on the Mets beat for, I guess this is my 11th season, part of my 11 seasons. So they've made the playoffs 3 times. And the Mets fan base travels really well. It's one of the things that is most impressive to me about this fan base, especially, you get the 7 line. They're always planning these excursions. So no, I don't think that has been a noticeable dip. Listen, when they're really in it, when they're in a pennant race, then you start to see an added influx, but it's generally a pretty good fan base in terms of traveling to road cities, no matter what the situation is with the team.
Connor, as someone that sees a lot of these fans, have you noticed any difference in the fan base at these bigger events?
I mean, listen, there's a portion of the fan base that's just naturally impatient. And I think the reality for Steve Cohen, and I don't think this is a fair reality, but it's one that exists, is that he bought a team that was coming off a bit of an era that was defined by frustration from the fan base, where the runway for him wasn't going to be typical of what a new ownership gets in terms of how long it takes for fans to be frustrated. So, and I think another thing was the fans weren't used to an offseason like this, that the Mets aggressiveness was scaled back a little bit. And here's the reality. They got their guy in David Stearns, the guy that Steve Cohen always wanted. And he's going to be given a big time runway to get this right. And that doesn't mean it's going to be done overnight, because honestly, most franchise turnovers that are done right, it's not done overnight. So I've seen frustration, but I think a majority of the fan base understands where the franchise is right now. And most importantly, they have a baseball person in charge that took, aggressive play by Steve Cohen to go get him. It wasn't cheap to go get David Stearns. He deserves credit for that. I think most of the fans understand that, and they understand that the big vision will be pulled off within about 2 to 3 years, not 90 days.
Yeah, and some of that frustration I know fans are feeling is coming from Mets pitching, and like Steve said, the issues like closing out games. So the Mets starting pitchers only went 3 2/3 innings in London. Mets relievers were solid, but again, continue to struggle to close out games. Connor, what part of the Mets pitching staff right now for you is the weak spot?
I think it's a little bit of the ups and downs they seem to be getting from Manaea and Quintana specifically, where you don't know if they're going to go out there and give you 6 of 1-run ball, or if they're not going to be able to get to, that 4 to 5 inning mark and keep you in the game. Ironically, the guy with the most variance in Luis Severino has been marvelous, in my opinion. That's not a concern as well. When Christian Scott was here, and he's going to be back here, they're just keeping an eye and monitoring his usage and workload as well. I thought he was relatively consistent for such a young player as well. So they're just trying to find consistency across the rotation to keep them in games through 6 innings, where they're not going to a bullpen that's dealt with a lot of injury in the 5th inning, because you could survive bullpen injuries. And the Mets have had a lot of them in high leverage spots, but can you survive them when you're going to guys that were really, whether street free agents or minor leaguers, when you need them to get you through the 5th inning and the 6th inning, and now even the 7th inning as well? So that's what the Mets need to find, but it's a lot easier said than done, because if you look all across baseball, no team has a rotation that has 4 or 5 guys that consistently go 6 innings in this era of the sport.
Yeah, I feel like it's getting less and less common to see anyone pitch a complete game. I feel like when I was young, I saw a lot of people pitch complete games. Steve, you're in the locker room all the time. Do you see a divide in the locker room at all when one area is struggling?
No, I mean, especially not with this team. I think, one of the things that has been a little surprising to me about the way this year has gone is that in spring training, the group felt very cohesive and, quite frankly, much different than a year ago. I spoke about this a little bit at the deadline last year with the moves that they made. That even from day one in spring training, something just kind of felt off last year about the group. It felt a little disconnected. And this spring, it was the polar opposite. And so I kind of expected that cohesiveness would actually lead to better results, because I think their talent is at a level where they're not going to be great, but they should be at a level where they're right there for a wild card spot. So anyway, so the room is really good, but in general, especially a year like this year, you've had these stretches where it's not as if the offense has been just off and running from day one and the pitching has let them down. You've had stretches where the offense has been terrible and the pitching's been great. You've had stretches where the starting pitching's been great and the bullpen's been terrible, and the bullpen's been great and the starting pitching's been terrible. So it kind of feels like everybody has their hand in this disappointment. And I also just think in general, sometimes stuff like that gets overstated. I think it happens probably a little more in a sport like football, where you're only playing offense or you're only playing defense. A sport like baseball, everybody feels like they've got a hand in everything. Even when you're, more of an offensive driven player, you're playing the field, you contribute to run prevention. So I've never really seen a great divide open up in a clubhouse where one element of the team is getting it done and the other element is not.
Yeah, it also seems like since the players only meeting, the Mets have started to get things going too. So it seems like a close team. Let's switch gears to who's on second. Jeff McNeil sat out 4 straight games before returning to the lineup in London. He went 2 for 4 on Sunday with 1 run scored. Steve, how do you think those days off maybe gave him a spark or gave him a boost?
Honestly, Niki, we have to see. It's great that he came back into the lineup and had a couple of hits, and that's important. Don't get me wrong, but this has been not just a season-long slump, but a season and a half long slump for Jeff McNeil. And the unfortunate thing about a player like Jeff McNeil is that if he is not hitting 300, 310, 320, then his contributions are limited to a team in this day and age, especially if you're going to limit him to mainly playing second base. I think if you look at Jeff McNeil as a player, his appeal was that he, hits for high average and he can play a number of different positions. They're not really using him in the outfield as often this year. So he's playing second base. He's, again, if we're being honest, played a below average second base. And so if he doesn't hit at an extraordinary clip in this day and age, average wise, then, his upside is very limited. So good start for Jeff yesterday, but I think he's been put on notice, and it's going to be very interesting in my mind to see what happens at the beginning of this Marlins series, because if I'm not mistaken, I think the Marlins are throwing 2 lefties in the first 2 games. And so you wonder if Iglesias gets those games, gets those starts against lefties, because Iglesias has done nothing but hit and play stellar defense as he's come up. He did not, play poorly, and thus Jeff McNeil went back into the lineup. It just got to a point where, you couldn't keep Benjamin McNeil. You had to give him a shot. So hopefully it's a spark, and hopefully this is a reset for Jeff McNeil and we see the 2022 version, but it is a very much wait and see with McNeil at this point for me.
Yeah, and you just mentioned Jose Iglesias. He's been really, really solid. Connor, do you think that he could become the Mets' everyday second baseman?
For this year, absolutely. Why not? I mean, if he hit in Syracuse, he's come up to the major leagues and he's continued to hit. And like Gelbs pointed out, he's not a loss on the defensive side as well. And then here's the reality with the Mets at second base right now, right? We were coming into the season hoping Ronnie Mauricio was going to carry over some momentum from last year. He's out for the year with the injury during fall ball. That was a bigger blow when you look back on it now. McNeil, as his struggles have gone on, has been a problem. We'll see what the future brings for him, but it's a real wait and see approach. And then the other guy that everybody has one eye on is Luis Angel Acuna. But here's the reality with Acuna right now. Really slow start to the season in April where he hit 235. And then in May, he figured, he kind of picked it back up. He hit 282. He stole 11 bases. He was kind of the guy, this more slap contact hitter and make things happen on the base paths that you were waiting to see. And then June only threw 8 games, but he's been hitting 171. So you need Acuna to really have a consistent stretch in AAA ball before you're bringing him up. So if McNeil's future is not with this team and Acuna is not ready, I mean, Steve, then Iglesias has to play. You need to play the guys that give you the best shot to win, and that's been him so far.
Yeah, and I go back to something that you said earlier about the competition and the culture that's being created here. This is something that is not just about this year with this new group at the top. Carlos Mendoza has come in, and he has brought a bit of an old school attitude, and this is not the type of team that you are just going to get a free ride. And I think David Stearns is the same way. And so whether it's what's going on at second base right now with Iglesias and McNeil, whether it's what's going on with the backup catcher job, which, again, I think most other regimes would just say, hey, we've got Alvarez coming back in a couple of weeks. No need to rock the boat. We'll have Nito or Narvaez for the next couple of weeks, and that's that. They didn't do that. They brought in a guy in Torrens to compete. And right now, I think he's probably in the driver's seat to earn that backup catcher role. You saw it with Vientos and Beatty. This is not a team that is just resting on their laurels, even with the season going the way that it has. And I think a lot of that has to do with not just this season, which is important, but also with creating this new culture about earning your way, which, listen, we haven't seen all the time. We didn't see it last year. Daniel Vogelback got a ridiculous amount of rope. Brett Beatty got a ridiculous amount of rope last year. It's a new way of doing things. There's a new sheriff in town, a new couple of sheriffs in town. And so for me, I think there is no question that Iglesias could be the starting second baseman for the remainder of the year if McNeil doesn't turn it around, or quite frankly, even if he does and this team doesn't turn it around, there's every chance in the world that a lot of these guys are on the trade block heading into the late July.
There's also some reports about Brett Beatty possibly switching to second base. So a lot going on. I think it's definitely competition in the team, which makes it good and a little bit more motivating. Let's take a look ahead at the Mets' upcoming series. The Mets take on the Marlins and the Padres at home. Then they travel to take on the Rangers on the road. Connor, we'll go to you. What do you think the Mets have to do over these next 9 games to get success?
Simply play above 500 baseball, right? The Marlins have just been dreadful. I mean, 22-43 right now. You'd like to see the Mets kind of treat them how they treated the Nationals, where ideally you sweep this team, but you have to take 2 out of 3. And then as you continue moving on, I mean, the Padres have gotten it together recently, but they're still an under 500 team, which I think would be disappointing by their standards. You'd like to try to find a way to steal that series. And then you're under the Rangers, who, once again, a little bit underwhelming right now, 3 games under 500. So for the Mets, I think you're looking at this and going, okay, what series can we sweep? The Marlins, and then can we start to take 2 out of 3 and stack some wins? You don't need to go 8-1. You'd like to, right? Try to climb back to 500, but you kind of have to scratch together series 2 out of 3 with a sweep here and there. And yes, you're going to lose some series down the stretch, but if the Mets can come out of this thing and look at it and go, hey, we went 6-3, that totally changes your outlook as you get closer to July. Easier said than done, though.
Yeah, Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Connor. I think the unfortunate thing is that they're coming back from London when they're facing the Marlins, a team that, again, you'd like to sweep. It's not the easiest stretch in the world, but they've had harder stretches this year. The series in Miami was greatly disappointing a few weeks ago. You cannot lose a series to the Marlins if you want to make any sort of a push. So minimum 2 out of 3, even with the travel schedule, and you'd like to earn that sweep. And then you've got to find a way to win that series against the Padres, because you've got to find a way to start playing better at home. The Mets have been dreadful at home this season. You have to find a way at Citi Field to start stacking some wins, stacking some series wins. And then, you go and you face the defending champs in Texas. If you've swept the Marlins, if you've won 2 out of 3 from the Padres, then in that scenario, even if you take 1 of 3 from Texas, you're still doing okay. But time is running very short on this team to prove to the front office that they're worth investing in rather than tearing down. And so it's got to start right now on Tuesday, and it's got to start with, dominating a really bad Marlins team.
Yeah, the crazy thing is the Mets are only 3 games out of the wild card, so the season definitely not over. Well, we are going to wrap up this edition of Mets Off Day Live. For Steve Gelbs and Connor Rogers, I'm Niki Lattarulo. Thanks for watching Mets Off Day Live, presented by Planet Fitness. Join Planet Fitness for $1 down, $24.99 a month. Deal ends June 14th. Enjoy.